So this happened to me just a few nights ago, on Tuesday evening to be exact, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around what actually went down. I'm honestly not sure if I should be more worried or if I'm just overthinking the whole thing, but either way, it's been eating at me ever since. For context, I'm a 20-year-old guy who still lives with my dad. I know some people might think that's pathetic or whatever, but honestly, I don't care. My dad and I have a great relationship, and living at home while I work and save money just makes sense right now. We moved into this place about 3 years ago after selling our old house across town, but we stayed in the same general area because most of our extended family is here. My uncle lives 2 streets over. My aunt and her kids are just around the corner, and my grandfather's place is maybe a 5-minute drive at most. I've known this neighborhood my entire life, spent summers riding bikes through these streets, played basketball at the local courts, all of that. It's always felt safe to me, like genuinely safe in a way that let me walk around at midnight without a second thought. The town itself sits near the Atlantic coast in an industrial area, lots of manufacturing facilities and processing plants that employ most of the people who live here. It's a working class community where people generally keep to themselves, work hard, take care of their families, and don't cause trouble. Everyone knows everyone, or at least knows someone who knows someone. It's that kind of place. Sure, or it's not perfect, nowhere is, but I'd always considered it pretty damn peaceful compared to the horror stories you hear about other places. That said, there have been some incidents over the years that remind you that darkness can creep in anywhere. About 8 months back, they discovered remains in a self-storage facility on the east side of town. Turned out to be a local woman who'd been killed by her ex-boyfriend, who ended up dying himself before the police could arrest him. Overdose, I think. Or maybe it was intentional. Nobody really knows for sure. Then there was this guy who worked at the same factory where I'm employed now. Got arrested last year for a hit and run that killed a jogger. He just drove off and left her there on the side of the road. So yeah, bad things happen here sometimes, just like they happen everywhere else. But most of the time it's quiet, normal, safe, which is exactly why what happened Tuesday night has me so rattled. It started out as the most ordinary day imaginable. I woke up around 6:30 in the morning, got ready for my shift, and headed to the factory where I work in quality control. 8 hours of checking measurements, filling out reports, the usual grind. Nothing exciting, nothing terrible. I clocked out at 3:30, drove home, and settled into my typical evening routine. I took a long shower to wash off the day, made myself a sandwich, and spent some time on my PlayStation playing through a game I'd been working on for the past week. I also smoked a bit, just to take the edge off after work, nothing crazy, and felt pretty relaxed as the evening rolled on. Around 8 o'clock, my dad's friend Margaret showed up. She lives just down the street, maybe 4 or 5 houses away, and she comes over pretty regularly to hang out and chat with my dad. They've been friends for years, since before my parents split up. She walked over, but mentioned when she arrived that she didn't want to walk back alone once it got dark, which I thought was reasonable enough. Our street doesn't have the best lighting, and even though the neighborhood is generally safe, it's smart to be cautious. So around 9:15 or so, my dad told me he was going to walk Margaret back home, and that he'd be right back. I was in my room at the time, halfway through a match in my game, and I just called out that I'd see him in a few minutes. I heard the front door close. Pro heard his car start up. I guess he decided to drive her the short distance instead of walking, and then the sound faded as he pulled out of the driveway. The house went quiet. Just me and the sound effects from my game. Then, maybe 60 seconds after my dad left, I thought I heard something at my bedroom window. It was this soft tapping sound, really faint, almost like branches scraping against the glass, except we don't have any trees close enough to my window for that to make sense. The sound was so irregular and quiet that I genuinely couldn't tell if I was actually hearing something or if my mind was playing tricks on me. I paused my game and listened for a moment, but the tapping, if it had even been real, had stopped. I felt this little prickle of unease creep up my spine, which annoyed me because I'm not usually the paranoid type. To distract myself and drown out whatever I thought I'd heard, I pulled up Spotify on my phone and started playing music through my speaker, something with a heavy beat to fill the silence. I kept the volume pretty loud for a minute or two, but then I had this nagging feeling that I needed to turn it down I don't know why exactly, just an instinct. So I lowered the volume significantly, and that's when I heard it. The back door. Our back door is old as hell, and makes this very specific, very loud sound when it opens. The hinges creak, but more than that, we keep a spare key hanging in the lock on the inside, and it rattles and jangles really distinctly whenever the door moves. I know that sound intimately because I hear it multiple times, every single day, and I definitely heard it right then, and I immediately turned off my music completely and sat frozen in my chair, barely breathing, just listening as hard as I could. I waited for the sound of footsteps, for my dad's voice calling out that he was back, for any normal explanation, but there was nothing. Complete silence. No footsteps on the tile floor of our kitchen, no voice, no further sounds of any kind. But I knew, I absolutely knew, that someone had opened that door. The sound was unmistakable. And more than that, I had this overwhelming sensation that someone was inside the house with me. It wasn't logical. It wasn't based on anything concrete, but every instinct I had was screaming that I wasn't alone anymore. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds or so. My mind racing through possibilities. Maybe my dad had come back and was playing a prank? No, that didn't make sense. He'd only been gone a couple of minutes. Maybe the door had just swung open on its own because we hadn't closed it properly, but I knew we had. And besides, that wouldn't explain the feeling of presence I couldn't shake. I remember that I keep a kitchen knife in my desk drawer. I'd started keeping it there after reading too many true crime stories online, telling myself it was better to have it and not need it than the reverse. My hands were shaking slightly as I quietly pulled open the drawer and grabbed the knife. The weight of it in my hand made me feel simultaneously safer and more ridiculous. Part of me was convinced I was overreacting, being paranoid for no reason, but I couldn't ignore what I'd heard. Oh, and I couldn't ignore the feeling. I stood up slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady, and moved toward my bedroom door. The house was still completely silent. I stepped out into the hallway, knife gripped in my right hand, and paused again to listen. Nothing. Then I had this idea, probably the stupidest idea I've ever had in my life, but in the moment it seemed logical. I thought that if someone had broken in, if someone was in my house, I should act confident, act like I was in control, like I wasn't afraid, like I had the upper hand. Maybe that would scare them off or make them think twice about whatever they were planning. So I whistled, just one sharp, clear note that echoed slightly in the hallway. I took a few more steps forward, while getting closer to the corner that would let me see into the living room where the back door was located. My pulse was racing, but I felt weirdly calm, like I committed to this course of action and just had to see it through. I stopped again, just before the corner, and whistled once more. Same single note, trying to project confidence I absolutely did not feel. I was about to step around the corner, about to look into the living room and confront whatever was or wasn't there. And then I heard it. Someone whistled back, the same note, almost mocking in its precision, coming clearly from the direction of the living room. Every hair on my body stood on end. My blood went ice cold. That confident facade I'd been maintaining shattered instantly, and I was just terrified, completely and utterly terrified, because that whistle confirmed everything. Someone was in my house. Someone had heard me. Someone was responding. I don't know how I managed to move, but somehow I forced myself to lean forward and peer around the corner into the living room. It was empty, completely empty. No one standing there, no one visible anywhere. But the back door was closed, and when I walked over to check it, my hand still trembling around the knife handle, I found it was unlocked. I have no idea if I'd forgotten to lock it earlier, or if someone had unlocked it from inside before leaving, and I honestly can't remember the state I left it in. My dad came home maybe 5 minutes later, and I heard his key in the front door and nearly collapsed with relief. He asked if everything was okay, because I guess I looked pale, and I just said yeah, everything was fine. I didn't tell him what happened. I still haven't told him, because how do you explain something like that? How do you say that someone broke into the house, whistled back at you like some kind of game, and then vanished without a trace? I've been checking and double checking every lock in the house since then. I barely slept at night, and I keep thinking about that whistle, that mocking echo of my own sound, and wondering who was in my house and what they wanted. whoever you were, whistling back at me from my living room. Let's not meet again. I need to share something that happened when I was younger. Something I only recently learned the full truth about. It's been eating at me since my aunt finally told me what really went down that afternoon. Last weekend, I was visiting my aunt's place with my daughter. We were sitting on her back porch, watching the kids play in the yard. My nephew Marcus was peeling bark off this old oak tree, and seeing him do that triggered this weird memory I hadn't thought about in years. I must have said something out loud because my aunt asked me what was wrong. I told her I was just remembering this strange thing that happened when I was about 9 years old. There used to be this little wooded area at the end of Maple Ridge, the subdivision where I grew up. All us kids called it the Cedar Grove, even though there were barely any cedar trees there. It was really just a narrow strip of pines and oaks between the road and a drainage ditch, but to us it felt like a real forest. One summer afternoon, I was hanging out there by myself, waiting for my friend Danny to finish his chores so we could ride bikes. I was bored, so I started picking at the bark on one of the trees, peeling off these long strips and watching the bugs scatter underneath. I remember the smell of pine sap on my fingers and how hot it was that day, the kind of sticky heat that makes your shirt cling to your back. That's when this man appeared. I say appeared because I genuinely didn't hear him coming. One second I was alone, and the next he was standing maybe 6 feet away from me. The first thing I noticed was the smell. He reeked of cigarettes, that stale, musty smell, like someone who chain smokes in a closed room. It was so strong it made my nose wrinkle. When I looked up at him, I felt this immediate knot in my stomach. He was probably in his 30s, I think, with greasy hair pulled back in a ponytail. What really freaked me out were his eyes. One of them was normal, but the other one was all milky and clouded over, and it didn't move right when he looked at me. His fingernails were long and stained dark brown, and his teeth were the same color when he smiled at me. My parents always taught me to be polite to everyone, no matter what they looked like, so I swallowed my fear and said hi. "What are you doing out here all alone?" he asked. His voice was raspy, like sandpaper, and his breath was somehow even worse than the cigarette smell. It smelled rotten, like something dead. Just peeling bark," I said quietly, not making eye contact. "You shouldn't do that," he said, moving closer. "That's like peeling off the tree's skin. How would you like it if someone peeled off your skin?" As he said this, he reached out and pinched my forearm with those yellow nails. They were sharp and it hurt. I pulled my arm away quickly and took a step back. "I guess I wouldn't like it," I mumbled, looking toward Danny's house, hoping to see him coming outside. The man kept staring at me with that cloudy eye, and he opened his mouth to say something else when I heard Danny's mom, Rachel, calling my name from their front door. She was telling me to come inside and wait for Danny in their living room where it was cooler. I didn't need to be told twice. I practically ran to their house, and honestly, I didn't think much about the encounter after that day. It was weird and uncomfortable, sure, but I was a kid. Weird stuff happened all the time, and I just moved on. But when I mentioned it to my aunt last weekend, her face went completely white. She got this look I'd never seen before, like guilt mixed with horror. She put down her coffee and said it was probably time I knew the whole story. She thought I'd forgotten about it entirely, so she never brought it up over the years. Here's what actually happened that day, the part I never knew about. Rachel, Danny's mom, had been watching a white cargo van parked on the street near the Cedar Grove all morning. Our neighborhood was small and close-knit, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's vehicles. This van was unfamiliar, and it had been sitting there for hours with no one getting in or out. Rachel told the police later that she just had this gut feeling something was wrong. Her house had these huge picture windows facing the street, and she could see both the van and the wooded area clearly from her kitchen. She saw me go into the trees to wait for Danny, and she kept glancing out the window while she did dishes, keeping one eye on that van. She even kept her cordless phone in her hand, she said, because something just felt off. Then she saw the driver's side door open, and a man got out and walked directly toward me. She watched him approach me and start talking to me. The moment she saw him grab my arm and pinch it, she dialed 911 and called me into the house at the same time. The police arrived within minutes. They spotted the white van trying to leave the neighborhood and pulled it over about 2 blocks away. The man claimed he was just lost and looking for an address, but the officers asked if they could look in the back of the van. He refused at first, which gave them probable cause to get a warrant. What they found in that van still makes my skin crawl. The back had no seats, just empty cargo space. The windows were covered with newspaper and tape from the inside. On the walls and ceiling, taped up everywhere, were photographs. Dozens and dozens of Polaroid photographs. All of them were of me. Me walking to school, me playing in my grandparents' backyard, me at the grocery store with my mom, me at the public pool, me getting off the school bus. Just me, everywhere I went, for what must have been weeks or even months. My aunt said there were probably 50 or 60 photos in total. They also found binoculars, more film for the Polaroid camera, and a key ring with 2 keys on it. One key was for the van. The other was for a storage facility about 20 minutes away. The police got another warrant and opened the storage unit that same evening. I'm going to tell you what my aunt told me they found, and I want you to understand that this is real. This actually happened. The storage unit was a 10 by 10 space, and every single interior surface was covered in thick plastic sheeting, the kind painters use for drop cloths. It was taped and stapled to the walls, floor, and ceiling. In the center of the unit was a hospital bed, but not a normal one, and it was one of those old institutional beds with leather restraints attached to the frame at the head and foot. The restraints showed wear, like they'd been used before. Against one wall was a metal cabinet. Inside were knives. Not just a few knives, but dozens of them, all different types. Kitchen knives, hunting knives, surgical scalpels, a meat cleaver, filleting knives, even some kind of curved blade my aunt said looked like it was for skinning. They were organized by size and type. There were also medical textbooks about human anatomy, including one specifically about surgical procedures. There was a box of obstetric tools, the kind used in childbirth, which the police found especially disturbing given the context. Rolls and rolls of duct tape, zip ties, rope, and lined up against the back wall were 8 empty 5-gallon buckets, the kind you'd buy at a hardware store. The police arrested him on the spot. My aunt said he barely reacted, just stood there with this blank expression while they handcuffed him. During the investigation, they discovered he'd been released from a psychiatric facility about 6 months before all this happened. He'd been committed years earlier for stalking and assaulting a child in another state, but he'd been deemed stabilized on medication and released under supervision. He'd stopped taking his medication and stopped checking in with his parole officer almost immediately. He was convicted and sent to a maximum security psychiatric prison. My parents decided not to tell me any of this because I seemed fine, and they didn't want to traumatize me with information I didn't need. My aunt said my mom had nightmares for years about what could have happened if Rachel hadn't been watching. I think about it sometimes now, especially since having my own kid. I think about how close it was. If Danny had finished his chores 5 minutes later, if Rachel had been in a different room, if I'd walked deeper into those trees. I don't let myself think about it too much. But yeah, that's my story. That's the day I almost became a photograph in someone's nightmare. So to that guy, wherever you are now, let's not meet again. Ever. This happened over the course of about 9 months, starting last autumn. My family had just finished a complete gut renovation on a house we'd purchased in a quiet residential area on the outskirts of town. The place had been a foreclosure, practically falling apart when we bought it, and it took us nearly 4 years of weekends, contractors, and way too much money to get it livable. But when we finally finished, it was perfect. The neighborhood seemed peaceful, tree-lined streets with modest homes, the kind of place where people actually waved to each other. Our neighbors on both sides came by with cookies within the first few days. Everything felt right. I was 17 at the time, a senior in high school, and I'd been looking forward to having my own room that wasn't in our cramped rental across town. The new house had this great kitchen with windows facing the street, and my bedroom was upstairs with a view of the front yard. I loved it immediately. Those first couple weeks were busy with unpacking, arranging furniture, and just getting used to the new space. My younger brother was excited about the bigger backyard, and my parents seemed genuinely happy for the first time in years. Then came the first incident. It was early October. maybe 10 or 11 days after we'd moved in. I've always been an early riser. Something about my internal clock just wakes me up before dawn. That particular morning, I got up around 4:30, couldn't fall back asleep, and figured I'd grab some water before getting ready for school. The house was completely silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I walked into the kitchen without turning on any lights, just the ambient glow from the street lamp outside filtering through the windows. That's when I saw him. There was a figure standing directly under the street lamp, in front of our house, maybe 30 feet from our front door. He was pacing back and forth, just a few steps in each direction, like he was waiting for something. I froze, watching him through the window. My first thought was that maybe he was waiting for a ride, or maybe he lived nearby and was out for an early morning walk. But something about the way he moved seemed off, too deliberate, too focused. I stood there watching for maybe 20 or 30 seconds, and then he stopped pacing and looked directly at the house. I don't know if he could see me through the window, but it felt like he was staring right at me. My heart jumped, and I instinctively stepped back from the window. When I looked again, he'd started walking down the street at a normal pace, hands in his pockets, like nothing had happened. I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe someone who worked an early shift, or someone who'd been out all night. I didn't mention it to anyone. Months passed, winter came, and I'd completely forgotten about the man under the street lamp. We'd settled into the house, made it feel like home. My brother had made friends with kids on the block. My parents were hosting dinners. Everything was normal. Then, in late February, something happened that brought it all back. I woke up in the middle of the night to our two dogs absolutely losing their minds. We had a German Shepherd mix and a smaller terrier, and both of them were barking like I'd never heard before. It was around 2 a.m, and I was terrified my parents would wake up and be furious. I rushed downstairs, trying to quiet them, when I noticed they were both fixated on the front window, hackles raised, teeth bared. I looked outside, and there he was again, the same man, standing in the exact same spot under the street lamp, but this time he wasn't pacing. He was completely still, facing our house, just standing there, staring. I felt ice run down my spine. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't someone passing through. The dogs kept barking, and I quickly flipped on the porch light. The moment I did, he turned and walked away at the same casual pace, like he had all the time in the world. I woke my dad up and told him everything, including the incident from October that I'd never mentioned. He listened, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and told me he'd keep an eye out. He said if I saw the guy again, to wake him up immediately and we'd call the police. He didn't seem overly concerned, which frustrated me, but I understood. What could we really report? A guy standing on a public street? I barely slept the rest of that night, and for weeks afterward I wake up multiple times, checking the window, but there was nothing, no sign of him. I started to think maybe my dad had been right to be skeptical. Maybe it really was just some weird coincidence, and the guy had moved on, or changed his routine, or whatever. Then came last week. It was a Tuesday evening, around 8 o'clock. My parents and brother had gone to a school event. Brania and I was home alone, working on a college application essay. We still had a portable storage container in the driveway from the movie, filled with stuff we hadn't found room for yet. I remembered I'd left some of my music equipment in there, and I wanted to grab my amp before I forgot about it again. I went outside with a flashlight, unlocked the container, and started digging through boxes. That's when the dog started going crazy again. Same frantic barking, same aggressive tone. I immediately felt my stomach drop. I climbed out of the container and looked toward the street, and sure enough, there he was. Same spot, same stance, just watching. This time, something in me snapped. Maybe it was anger, maybe it was stupidity, but I was done being scared in my own home. I ran inside, grabbed an aluminum bat from the hall closet, and marched straight out the front door. The second I stepped onto the porch, he started backing away. I yelled at him, something like, "Hey, what the hell do you want?" And he turned and ran, actually ran, disappearing around the corner at the end of the block. I stood there shaking, adrenaline pumping, realizing how incredibly stupid I'd just been. When my parents got home, I told them everything. My dad was furious with me for confronting the guy, and rightfully so. My mom was terrified. We called the police, and 2 officers came out, took a report, asked for a description. I couldn't give them much. Average height, dark jacket, couldn't see his face in the shadows. They said they'd increase patrols in the area and told us to call immediately if we saw him again. That brings me to last night. We'd gone to dinner with some of my mom's co-workers and their families. Got home around 10:30. My dad was driving, and as we turned onto our street, our headlights swept across our front yard. And there he was, not under the street lamp this time. He was standing in our yard, maybe 15 feet from our front door, next to the bush by the walkway. My dad slammed on the brakes, and the man bolted, just took off running down the sidewalk. My dad pulled into the driveway, told us to get inside, and grabbed something from the glove compartment. I didn't see what it was, but I knew. My mom, brother, and I rushed into the house, and my mom immediately called 911 while my brother and I locked every door and window we could find. Through the front window, I could see my dad standing at the end of our driveway, watching the street, and he stood there for what felt like forever. Later, he told us the man had stopped about a block away, turned around, and just stared back at him for almost a minute before finally disappearing into the darkness between houses. The police came again, searched the area, found nothing. They've told us to document everything, install cameras, keep our doors locked. We're doing all of that now. But the worst part is not knowing what he wants, how long he's been watching, or if he'll come back. Every sound at night makes me jump. Every shadow outside the window could be him. I don't know who this man is or what he wants from us. But whoever you are, standing under that lamppost, watching our house in the middle of the night, please let's not meet again.